For over 75 years, we've looked to one number to tell us how our countries are doing: GDP. If GDP grows, we celebrate. If it falls, we panic. But here's the problem. GDP was never meant to measure progress. It tells us how fast the economy is growing, but not whether that growth is sustainable or fair. It counts disasters as gains. It ignores unpaid care work, clean air, mental health, and trust in our communities. As the UN Secretary General put it, relying solely on GDP is a glaring blind spot. Take many countries. GDP looked strong on paper, but they were steadily depleting their natural wealth. By the time the numbers declined, the damage was already done. So where do we go from here? More and more experts and global institutions agree we need to measure not just income, but wealth, the foundation of long-term well-being. Comprehensive wealth gives us that fuller picture. It includes 5 key types of capital: natural, human, social, produced, and financial. It's concise, just a few key indicators. It's robust, built on decades of research. And it's relevant, because it's directly connected to what matters: education, clean water, social cohesion, and the capacity to thrive tomorrow. Want to understand the real drivers of prosperity? Want to help build policies that benefit people and the planet? Then this free online course is for you. Whether you're working in government, civil society, or the media, or just passionate about better data, this course will help you make sense of why we need to move beyond GDP. Visit the course and discover what GDP doesn't tell you.
It's my pleasure now to turn the microphone over to Livia Bizikova. Livia, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. And as Matt said, we are very excited to have this event and for all of you joining us, because after many years, IISD has been working on Beyond GDP. We are now beyond our research products. We are also launching a learning tool. IISD's work on Beyond GDP is done in partnership with the International Institute with the International Development Research Center, IDRC. And in this event, we also have the Thinking Economics and the United Nations Geneva Beyond Lab together joining us. The focus of IISD's work, and this is what the tool is based about, has been to help countries to move beyond GDP. Because as we heard in the short video, what matters is not just the trends in GDP, but how country allocates resources, the policies they design, and how it impacts the well-being of their people and well-being of the planet and nature. In this context, and while the IISD has been working on the topic of beyond GDP, a lot of things change in the international arena. And in the video, you saw a quote by Secretary General. There has been a lot of movement to advance the beyond GDP focus by designing an expert group, a UN expert group to move beyond GDP as an outcome of the Summit of the Future in September 2024. The expert group is now working on selecting a limited set of indicators that countries can use to complement GDP and to monitor progress next to GDP. The expert group will have their findings during next year, so during 2026. And as their findings are coming up, we will also be integrating them into the online tool. But at this point, what we learned and why we did this online tool is that when we worked in 3 countries, Trinidad and Tobago, Ethiopia, and Indonesia, we worked with 3 universities: Mekelle University in Ethiopia, Universitas Indonesia in Indonesia, and University of West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. We learned that while students, young professionals at statistical offices, young professionals at the government agencies, they are very much aware of what's wrong with GDP, there is not such a strong awareness about what to do about it, how to complement GDP, how to address challenges. And given this movement in the international arena, where there is a lot more calls and a lot more questions asked about how we can address shortcomings of GDP, and seeing this gap, that we experience in terms of the learnings and information available about how to move beyond GDP, we felt that this online tool can help us to address these challenges, and hopefully will also improve the education so that we will be interested to not just learn, and the public not just learn about how GDP is doing, but also how those other indicators that are aiming to complement GDP are doing. And so this led to the launch of this online tool, and it is based on our experiences in the 3 countries, and also kind of the overall literature and trends about what is suggested to consider when we move beyond GDP. So I just provide you a few slides about what is in the tool, and then, as Matt said, you will receive the link to the tool after the event. And as I mentioned, we will be keeping on track of the international developments around beyond GDP and tweaking the tool so that to be really up to date. Next slide, please. So the tool is basically a self-paced course that consists of 4 interactive online modules. It is open, there is no registration required, and it's free of charge. And it is available in 3 languages, in English, Spanish, and French. The target audience, this really comes from our experience, is mostly university students, postdocs, PhDs, master students, but also young professionals that end up in government, statistical agencies, so that they have a skill set and an understanding that not only GDP is part of measuring the progress of country, but other indicators can be considered as well, and as well as anybody who is interested in this topic. To go through the course, it would take, let's say, up to 3.5 to 4 hours, roughly 1 hour per module. Next slide. So the purpose of the course is really to show how beyond a GDP can be used to measure wealth. And as you've seen in the video, there is also a deep dive of one of the indicators or indices that are recommended to move beyond GDP. And then an important part that I haven't mentioned was also based on our learning is how to improve decision making. Because what also we found that the strongest part of moving beyond GDP is that middle part, designing indicators, collecting data. But both the knowledge from the general knowledge from the universities and educators was quite low on beyond GDP, as well as the linkages to policymaking was quite low. So here we are also specifically looking at not just to design the indicators, but how to use them, how to make better policies. Next one. We also are looking at how to look at the trends in GDP, how GDP was calculated, and how we led into a situation where we are now over historical changes and recommendations by a different group of experts of how to use GDP, how not to use GDP, and that kind of historical context that help us understand where we are now. We are also providing details about major alternative approaches that are suggested to be used to complement GDP and measure progress. And they are examples from the literature, well-being indicators, the well-known happiness index from Bhutan, and some other indicators or indices that are considered to complement GDP. Next slide. So this is how it looks like. So as I said, it's roughly 4 hours, 1 hour per each module. We start with understanding what's wrong with GDP, how GDP came about, going through approaches in module 2 of how to complement GDP, what are the options we have at this point to use to complement GDP, because this was also one of the learning from our experience working on beyond GDP, that many countries have a decent amount of data that they can start monitoring beyond GDP right now. It will require data processing, data coordination between different departments of statistical offices, pulling together the data, but it's not something that countries should be considered doing somewhere in the far future once they are ready. They are kind of ready now, and so module 2 is talking about what are those approaches to consider. Module 3 provides a deep dive of one of the potential indices to complement GDP, just to show you how kind of a data collection indicators, what is needed to develop to apply such an index in a specific context. And we chose an index called comprehensive wealth. Sometimes it's also very similar to inclusive wealth. And that's an indicator or an index that has been researched for many years, and it's quite robust in methodologies. And it was recommended as an input from to the Summit of the Future, but by UN Secretary General as one of the 4 indices to consider when moving beyond GDP. And then we have module 4 that only focuses on the policy implication. What can we do if we have such estimates on indicators to complement GDP? What kind of different policies we can do? What kind of different investments we can do? Because at the end, it's about that, how to make better decisions to improve well-being, to improve quality of nature, instead of, just measuring and complement to GDP. Next slide. Because it's an online learning course, it's also, we try to make it as interesting as possible. And here is a big thank you for our 2 colleagues, Leslie Paz for the design, and also Yula Todd for the graphics. And the focus is really to create an engaging format that is supported by visuals to kind of make you excited to learn and to remember. Also, there are role plays and decision-making scenarios to, when you ask the question about how would you complement GDP, what details would you consider, what would you answer? And there are also practice and reflection questions to kind of keep you thinking and rethinking what you just learned and hopefully remember and apply in your future jobs. Next slide. So now, describing the approach, what we also learned is that we did the learning tool, which is based on the experience. There is also this excitement about beyond GDP in the international arena. So what next? How these kind of learning tools can be used or integrated into the educational system, academia, and also what are the challenges and capacity gaps and opportunities that we can have in a way to provide opportunities for the education system to engage in teaching about beyond GDP, but also provide opportunities for youth to be engaged in terms of how best countries and the global community can move beyond GDP. And for this, we have an amazing panel today to talk about this specific aspect. Each of our panelists have their own different experience on the beyond GDP topic. They're also engaged in a different way in the academic environment. And so I'm very happy to introduce Kaylee Taylor, who is our moderator for the panel. Kaylee is the Managing Director of Sustainable Finance Geneva. Thank you for joining us, Kaylee. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Livia and Matthew, for having me. Livia didn't mention it, but I'm former IISD, so once IISD, always IISD, I guess. And it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, Livia just froze, so I wanted to make sure we're good. Okay, perfect. So I will invite all my panelists to turn on their cameras. We have a great panel for you today. It's very fun for me to be here because when I was in university, I co-founded a NGO that engaged youth in the energy transition. And this is why I think Livia invited me to join, because I've been thinking about this very crucial moment, which is the university level, the research and academic level, and how that really shapes future leaders for a very long time. So I am absolutely thrilled to have 4 fellow thinkers in this space joining us who are going to give different perspectives related to the to how beyond GDP can be brought into the academic system. So I'll introduce each of them. We have Aline Halmi-Tusadia, who is the head of Green Economy and Climate Research Group at the Institute for Economic and Social Research in the Faculty of Economics and Business at the Universitas Indonesia. Felix Vincent, who is at the Universidad de Buenos Aires in Argentina, and is actually one of the winners of the Beyond GDP essay contest that was done between IISD and the Beyond Lab. We have Anaheke, Anaheke Jansen, who's a PhD candidate at the Institute of Environmental Sciences, Leiden University, and a research associate at the Wellbeing Research Center at the Oxford University. And Sonal Raghuvanashi, who is a senior economist at Rethinking Economics International. So what I thought we would do to kind of kick off the conversation and get each person to introduce themselves and the approach or the way that they come at this topic is just start with an opening question for each of you. So Aline, I'm putting you in the hot seat first. As Livia mentioned, your university team contributed to IISD's Beyond GDP initiative with you actually leading the Indonesia study. So could you briefly first start by kind of highlighting the study's core focus, and then maybe talk a little bit about the skill sets that were involved and the key experiences that enabled you to complete the project successfully, and also if you came across any gaps as you were going through the process.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, for your nice introduction, and thanks for having me here. I'm very grateful to be part of IISD's Beyond GDP initiative. We learn a lot and do our best to promote this idea of developing metrics to complement GDP as a measure of well-being. So our team measures Indonesia's comprehensive wealth and its historical trend. Comprehensive wealth measure our ability to produce tangible and intangible goods and services that enhance well-being. So we assess, produce natural, human, financial, and social capital, although we only quantified 4 of these 5 types of capital. In the process, we need to figure out how a variable is conceptualized and also measured, especially for more abstract concept, for example, like economic rents from plantation. Then we have to find the relevant data sets and see whether their levels and changes reflect what is going on in the field. And if needed, we make judgment on how to adjust them. So the calculation itself is actually fairly simple, and once this was done, so it is not too complicated actually. Since this type of measurement isn't included yet in official statistics, we need to collect data from various sources and analyze it to ensure it aligns with the indicators. Not all data is immediately usable, and some data is missing. So we must perform, for example, some interpolation or extrapolation. Therefore, I think it wasn't enough to only analyze the numbers in the data set. Examining the metadata and also understanding the relationship between data set also important. And we had an excellent team. And I think IISD has developed an effective way to transfer their knowledge and allowing us to perform the calculation on our own. The 3 country teams involved in the project are Indonesia, Ethiopia, and Trinidad and Tobago. And this project, we calculate each type of capital sequentially. So after learning one type of capital, we collect data and perform the calculation until all types of capital are calculated. And we learn a lot also from our colleagues in Ethiopia and Trinidad and Tobago, and have found that each country faces its own challenges. We also had a productive discussion on interpreting the result and also creating a narrative on how these metrics can guide policymakers. I think the interpretation and narrative are just as important as the calculation themselves, because ultimately we want policymakers and the public to understand what lies behind the numbers and how it relates to the development planning and also policy making. We held a session, I think 2 years ago, to share information about comprehensive wealth calculation and also the importance of it. We received positive feedback and both from the statistical office and also think tanks. And I believe this process should be replicated in other countries. And in Indonesia, I think there is an opportunity to perform this at a subnational level. I end my remarks here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aline, for first shining light on how the project rolled out, but then also a little bit about what you ended up taking away from it in terms of what was needed within your team, and how important that narrative piece was to follow alongside the actual number crunching. So this is very helpful. And as we go in deeper into the discussion, this is something that we will keep in mind. Felix, turning to you as one of the winners of the Beyond GDP essay competition, I'm curious, and I'm sure the audience is as well, what inspired you to submit an essay Was there something in your studies up to that point that had contributed to you wanting to explore this theme and unpack this concept of GDP and going beyond it?
Okay, so thank you very much, Kali, for your question. Thank you very much for having me here. I think what inspired me to submit the essay was like the strong belief that to respond to the urgent problems we face today, we need to go back to basic ideas of political economy. When we forget those foundations, we lose the ability to ask the right questions and to find direction for action. That's also the spirit of rethinking economics. We believe the current state of the discipline and the way it is taught has become like a broken mirror of reality. It reflects part of the world, but not the whole picture. So it leaves us without space or guidance for political action. So the first step is to return to big questions and not to only multiply small empirical answers. Over time, economics has been divided into positive economics and normative economics, and this separation made the field toward very specific case of studies, sometimes interesting, but often disconnected from bigger systemic crises we are living through. So when we stop asking the big questions, we also lose the space to act. So in that context, my essay focused on the system of national accounts. I wanted to show that thinking about national accounting, it's not just about a statistic, but about changing the framework itself and what we decide to count and what we decide to ignore shapes how we see the economy and how we imagine possible change. So yeah, so for me, writing the essay was a way to use something very familiar, which is GDP, to question the foundations of how we define value, how we define progress, and showing that going back to fundamentals is not actually going backwards.
Mhm.
I think that's the answer to your question.
Thanks so much for that, Felix. I think we all want lots of young leaders like you who are focused on rethinking those foundations. Just maybe to ask a quick follow-up question there, what got you interested in this topic, this economics topic, and got you inspired to think back to those fundamental issues? Was there a moment, a paper, a documentary? Was there something, or was it just something you've always been interested in?
No, actually, when there's a moment when you realize in your bachelor degree that you wanted to study economics to change the world, and then you might not get the tools you need in order to do so. So then you start studying on your own, or actually, in my case, joining rethinking economics, and then you start to realize that going back to theory, going back to big questions, big authors. I don't know, sometimes Smith, Ricardo, Marx, whatever. We don't see that in our curricula. So then I realized that we might have a way to answer to those questions, but those questions are not being addressed in our universities. So I think, yeah, actually at the beginning of my bachelor degree, I realized I had to be able to participate in these other alternative spaces. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Now moving to Anheka, who is pursuing a PhD. So you're focusing on developing frameworks for beyond GDP indicators and metrics. How has this topic been addressed throughout your academic journey, and how accessible was it to select and explore within the academic system?
Yeah, thank you, Gali, and also thanks for having me. It's really great to see so many people from different countries being here together to discuss this. Yeah, so Beyond GDP was really the starting point of my my PhD, and what is quite common when you start a PhD is to first do a review. So you start by analyzing all the work that is already out there to get a good idea of the work that has been done. And when it comes to beyond GDP, there's a lot. There's been like over 50 years of international institutes, academics, civil society organizations trying to address the need to move beyond GDP. And I think, I am extremely lucky also with my supervisor, who's Rutger Hoekstra, who's been in this field for many years and who wrote a book called Replacing GDP by 2030. He could kind of pinpoint me towards the interesting books and papers, etc., and tell me a lot about the beyond GDP space. So I think I got very lucky there as well. That being said, I also think it's important to not keep the debate limited to just the academic world. And I also try to continue to learn also from people outside the academic domain. Because I think in the end, if we want to move beyond GDP, if we want to foster well-being or what it means for us to truly progress, I think we also need to hear, for example, the youth, but in more general, people around the world.
Thank you so much for that. You really got me thinking about two things with your response. The first is when you mentioned your advisor, it really makes me realize that when the question was around what made it accessible to start looking at these topics, there was a person who helped you do that. And I think seeing the number of people on this webinar right now, it's good to remember that there is a community who can help us to address these topics. And what you also said about it not just being an academic pursuit, that we have to look at practitioners and policymakers and engage with them across the academic and practitioner line. So I think those are really important things to think about when we're thinking about this tool and mainstreaming knowledge. So thank you so much, Anjeka. Now we'll turn to Sonal. You've been working actively to shift the focus of economic education towards pressing global issues such as climate change, inequality, and sustainability. What are the gaps you've seen doing this work, and what approaches have you taken to address those gaps?
Yeah, okay. Thanks for the question. I must say this from the start, that the problems with economics education are very much symptomatic of the state of the economics discipline, right? As one of the most monolithic fields within the social sciences. And so for several decades, I think the dissatisfaction within the ranks of economics has been met with some sort of an incrementalist approach. However, it's really the key political moments that make us realize how far, in a way, the discipline is from any credible analysis of the present, right? So let me put this in a little bit of context. Be it the 2008 financial crisis or the COVID crisis, they provide a good point of reflection from contemporary history, or the existence of like a settler colonial apartheid state, or the ongoing colonial relations in our immediate temporality. Goes without saying that in each of these political moments, economics education's inability to bring these contemporary issues to the classroom is part of the larger systemic failure, right? And coming to your core question, I think the biggest gap in this work is that the new economy movement, and I see representatives of a lot of those in the audience today, is quite vibrant when it comes to research, policy advocacy, think tank, or even civil society organizations working on issues of economic justice. But somehow the economics education is not as well invested in, despite the fact that all of our theories of change really converge towards the marathon that is economics curriculum reform, right? So at Rethinking Economics International, we try and do this by placing students at the heart of our theory of change, right? So while working with academics, of course, and pedagogues on similar questions and facilitating learning and exposure outside of the system where possible. And as far as the whole matter of introducing frameworks beyond GDP is concerned, I think it should not be, it is not, and it should not be isolated. It should not be an isolated demand out of the curriculum, right? Because the well-embedded nature of GDP itself is built on the cult of market short-termism, which is with an impoverished array of, again, historical evidence drawing broad gauge conclusions about the tendency of human progress, what matters and what doesn't. So I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Sonal. So can you maybe just double click a little bit on students being key to your theory of change? What approaches do you take to engage students in this rethinking of economics?
Yeah, so I think Rethinking Economics is a membership-driven body, and for the longest time, it's been a student-led movement, right? So it's present in across the world. It's like an international movement, and at the heart of a lot of the work that these groups do is advocating for curriculum reform in their universities, right? So, I mean, we've heard this adage multiple times that curriculum change or changes in the way students are taught and what they're taught doesn't happen at the level of the departments, right? There are multiple exigencies as to why that doesn't take place in that particular order. Rethinking Economics really places a lot of emphasis in student mobilizing for the education that they want, in 21st century. I mean, the movement itself came after the 2008 financial crisis, where the students said that, yeah, sure, we went through it, but our economics education did not really prepare us for this moment, right? And since then, students have only double-clicked or emphasized on what was missing with every contemporary history that we passed through. So a lot of the programs that Rethinking Economics runs are student-led, be it educational programs, be it, and all of the work that we do is really pillared across three frames. It's like educating ourselves and those around us, organizing, and then agitating. So I think those are really the frameworks that we work with. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So to kind of summarize what I've heard, it will be very difficult to do because you've all made so many fantastic comments, but some of the big things I took away. So the first is that there are many actors involved here. So the students being crucial, but also we talked a lot about advisors and the researchers and the role they can play, both in kind of inspiring students to look at these things, but also in that maybe sometimes the system is a bit in inertia and sticking with the common thinking in the discipline, but then also linking to practitioners and policymakers and others to make sure that that knowledge makes it across. Then also I heard that we need to ask ourselves big questions, question those fundamentals, and focus on narratives. So those are all really great segues into my next question, which is about tangibly how we do this. So how can curricula begin to integrate a concept like beyond GDP or environmental stewardship, so social cohesion and well-being into the education systems, into the curricula, without burdening already stretched education systems? Do you see some pathways to doing that or some building blocks? If anyone wants to jump in first, if not, I'm going to pick on you, but does anyone have an immediate answer to this? Yeah, go ahead, Sonal, and then I'll go to Alan next.
Maybe we just start with the fact that our education system, in terms of content, are not overstretched, right? It's a scaling of priority, right? So I'll give an example with an urge to, not look at it in an isolated fill in or ditch it sort of manner. Say, for example, the heavy emphasis on formal modeling, mathematical and statistical techniques in economics curriculum, which often diverts students' attention away from broad social, political, ethical concerns, ultimately, leading them to internalize the discipline's implicit ideological framings without critical reflection. That itself, in a way, tells us a lot more about how competing approaches are not refuted through critical engagement, and this very much stands for frameworks beyond GDP, but they're rather rejected by omission, routinely dismissed as impractical, unscientific, politically motivated, or even ideologically suspect, right? In our work also at Rethinking Economics International, I think the starting point of advocacy is this lack of diversity of methods, theory, and epistemologies that result into sort of an intellectual closure that extends well beyond the classroom. And I think this narrowing of historic intellectual horizons constrains the discipline's ability to foster any pluralist or socially responsive forms of thinking, be it ecological collapse or deepening economic precarity due to structural disruptions, XYZ, right? So the building blocks of such an integration has to be correct analysis of the problem at hand. And with matters such as these, the buck really stops at creating a consensus among experts and working through the statistical coalface and data gaps in time use, both nationally and internationally, and to develop a framework that is as sophisticated and as well embedded as GDP. And I think the interventions earlier from Alan really took us through as to what these statistical exercises look like in practice, right? And we simultaneously, of course, work on the narrative piece of it, the educate bit of it, and creating some sort of a common lexicon, if I may, and these issues. Yeah.
Thanks, Sonal. So a proper analysis of the problem is the start point, and then building out methodologies and addressing the data gaps, getting a framework that's as sophisticated so that there's confidence in these models to start getting them integrated into the system. Aline, can I pass to you, based on your experience in Indonesia, are there steps you think we could take to better integrate this into kind of classical economics education?
Yeah. Yeah, I think most the economic teaching in Indonesia is still following a traditional learning approach, including the course content. I agree with Sonal. However, some topics beyond GDP have been included in certain session in some courses, but they are not given much emphasis. For example, like limitation of GDP is actually already covered in a chapter in introductory macroeconomics, and also like environmental accounting also has been included in a chapter of environmental and natural resource economics. But it is not translated enough. For example, like it is not encourage students to think more deeply or incorporate this topic into their thesis. Yeah, and most of the macro indicators used by student thesis really still rely on GDP metrics. Yeah. That's why I really appreciate the initiative of IISD to produce this e-course on this topic, and I hope many educational institutions use this as a tool and also expand further and spread the idea of this. And I think we need to have a clear, like maybe like roadmap something. First, what we should think is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to integrate beyond GDP into development planning and policy making, looking at more forward-looking. And then the second one is we have to identify the role of educational system in reaching that ultimate goal. And looking at this, maybe, I don't know, maybe we can also think beyond economic teaching. Maybe it also relates to broader subject outside economics. Yeah, we have to identify that, and then we need to have like strategy, whether we put it as, you know, a topic in a course or a course itself, or even creating a dedicated program for this purpose. And I also believe that not only teaching but also research, yeah, and also advocacy also important in this point. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Aline. So some of these supplementary tools like what IISD has created can help to fill in these gaps as we get that broader roadmap to start integrating it. Angelica, do you have any thoughts on this one, on how we could build those or put those building blocks into place to integrate more seamlessly this theory or this topic?
I think I can keep it quite short because I completely agree also what has been said already by Sonal, also in terms of the importance of plurality of thinking, and also by Aline. Maybe one thing that also relates a bit to what Aline is saying, that we need to think about the ultimate goal. And I think also within the economics education, we need to be aware that the ultimate goal of economics is not just giving markets free way and growing the pie and making profits and growing GDP, but that economics itself is about people. It's about how we organize our society and our resources. So I also think that rethinking the ultimate goal and the purpose of economics itself is really important to address within the economics education.
Thank you so much, Angelica. And this perfectly allows me to pass the floor to Felix, because you talked about also getting back to those basics. What are the big pictures? And I think you said that perfectly, Anieka. It's really about economics is about how people organize ourselves around these market pieces. So Felix, any last thoughts on this before I turn to the Q&A?
No, I think I'll be short, but it's what I mean is that what we need is, I think, is not only the addition of new topics, but like a sort of dynamic transformation within theory itself. Because going beyond GDP should not mean like expanding the curriculum, but rethinking the conceptual like foundations that organize it. It's not only new courses in environment or gender economics and stuff, because when theory changes, like everything else follows. The question we ask, the indicators we build, even the kind of policies we imagine. So real change in economics education comes from, yeah, more it's more about returning to theory than adding content. That's what I say here.
I see the point. I think you all kind of said that in some form about really getting to a deep analysis of the issue, thinking through the roadmap that's needed, and getting back to basics. So thank you all for that. I'm going to turn to the Q&A because we have a few questions. I might ask Livia also to turn on her camera just for this part, because I think there are a couple questions about the tool. So maybe starting with a couple questions that are more technical, which are probably good for Livia and Aline. The first one is, does the Beyond GDP tool dismantle the hegemony of Western psychological metrics for measuring well-being? So I think the idea here as well is, does the tool or what measures is the tool looking at that potentially go beyond kind of these classical neoclassical liberal ideologies? And then from the same person, and maybe Aline could speak to this, given your work in Indonesia, since the data collection seems to be in phases per each of the capitals, and you mentioned, I think, Aline, that you didn't get to all of the capitals, what role does time difference play in the final analysis by the time all of the capitals are analyzed and merged? So maybe I'll turn to Livia, and I'll start with you, Livia, on kind of what's included in the tool, and then I'll go to Aline on some of the things around the data side.
Thank you so much. I think this was a very, very interesting discussion, especially talking about the ultimate goal, how we can change the thinking, because that was also our observation, what we had dealing with professionals in statistical offices, in government agencies, that because of such a strong focus on GDP, everybody just gets sucked into the mode of working on GDP and feeding into the process. So there is no resources, funding, time, or like prioritization to kind of find other ways of measuring progress or addressing well-being challenges. In terms of the application, so we use the index that has been applied for many countries around the world. Our 3 countries in Indonesia, Trinidad and Tobago, and Ethiopia, where we had a standardized methodology, and we worked in a capacity building approach with them so that they can adjust what exactly they measure in their countries, what kind of data set they use based on the specific situation in the country. For example, in Ethiopia, it was a very strong role of cooperatives in collaboration and building capacity, while in the other 2 countries, let's say, cooperatives doesn't play that role in building social capital. So it was that kind of acknowledgement, let's say, a strong role in agriculture in one country, not such a strong role in other country. So there were a lot of adjustments made and prioritized so that they reflect on the progress and on the development path that the country is in. And on the long, and just a one sentence on the data side, so it's already been mentioned, that kind of very short-term focus of GDP thinking, which makes countries to really make policies that are manifest results in a very short term. And so in the studies, we worked on the 20-year period, so roughly from 2000 till 2020, which also spans, very often different governments. So it's not also an issue of, your government or my government made this decision, but it really looks a trend when you start seeing, the countries investing more into human capital or more into infrastructure, or not investing enough in sustainable land management, because you have a good time frame to go beyond these very short-term focus that GDP kind of pushes us and pushes the decision makers and investment allocations to achieve a certain trend in GDP.
Perfect. And maybe pass it to Aline now. Did you come across any issues with the time horizons or the phases of the data collection when you needed to merge it all together?
Yeah, I try to understand the question, but related to this time issue, first I would like to respond on the technical issues that we found because some of the data we gathered is not in like one from the one package of data. So we need to make the base year as the same. And sometimes the definition of certain indicators between period is different. So we need to some kind of either recalculate or make notes on that. That's one issue. And about the time issue, I think I want to highlight also about the way that the comprehensive wealth look at the indicators, because comprehensive wealth is forward-looking indicators, while GDP is short-handed indicators. And I think we need to emphasize on this in giving a narrative to policymakers and public how to make the growth itself or the development as a broader concept to be like more sustainable and long-term. We have resilience in the long term, and then we can also look at the trade-off, because in this time different, it can be trade-off. For example, like natural capital we have now, and in the future it will reduce, and how we can trade that, for example, to other capital. I think that's all my intervention.
Thank you so much, Aline. I'm going to give the next question to Angelica on what are the likely new narratives that could complement GDP to give us this real picture of the level of economic activities and the broader welfare of citizens. Do you have any ideas of what some of those narratives could be?
A potential narrative that comes to my mind is really a well-being based narrative. So this is of course very broad still, but I think the Well-Being Economy Alliance has been very fruitful. So making this more concrete in explaining what this means, what constitutes well-being. And I think that the good thing about focusing on well-being rather than just beyond GDP is that it stays away a bit from this thing of that we perhaps need to ungrow some economies, like degrowth, for example, which can be politically quite tricky. Whereas if we focus on something positive, like nurturing well-being and preferably sustainable and inclusive well-being, I think that also has a better political chance of working out and competing to an economic growth narrative.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Sonal, any thoughts on the narratives?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not so sure about the narratives, but I take a leaf from what Felix earlier said, that it really requires us to rethink some of the basics and what we value, because the moment we value something, we start measuring it, right? So I would rather think about it in terms of existing measures, or easier measures rather, that already could be good complements to beyond GDP. I think the first one that perhaps comes to mind is like a labor market indicator, right? So like median wage multiplied by employment rate, which is like a better indicator of conditions faced by most workers than average mean wage, which can be overtly influenced by higher remuneration at the top, right? So, but it also tells you the extent of unpaid labor typically performed mostly by women. Another one that comes to my mind, so I mean, that's one way of thinking about, and maybe converging with the well-being narrative that Anahika and many others have been working on for a really long time. Another instrument perhaps could be thinking about nutrition indicators or per capita food consumption. And there are enough of FAO's definitions around it to really benchmark it to. Then again, time use indicators disaggregated by gender. This is all to say that, a lot of the humdrum created around the world around that, it's a huge statistical exercise and so on and so forth. Yes, of course it is, but there are several complementary indicators that could already be used alongside GDP to think about the well-being of our economies, more so in the global south, right? Like we're economies where informal work is majority of our workforce. So clearly GDP is probably not even giving us a good sense of the health of our economy. So, or even time use indicators. I mean, this is like a common denominator of very low-hanging fruit rather. And similarly, I can think about, relational time use indicators, which help you with, disaggregated at some level by gender, which helps you understand paid work, unpaid work, personal leisure, relational time, gives you a sense of different classes in society. Similarly, I'm sure per capita emission could be another way of thinking about it as well, right? Who consumes more, who's not. So it gives you a good picture of not thinking about consumption as this net flow rather than thinking about it in a disaggregated manner across class within a society. So yeah. And any of the narratives that really weave all of these together could be really useful for us.
This is great because I think there's the narrative, and then as you said, there's these complementary indicators that we can already start implementing, and it's actually one of the questions we had prepared. So maybe I'll turn to Felix. Is there anything you'd want to add that you see as potentially good complementary indicators or the types of indicators we need to start integrating to contribute to the broader vision?
Yeah, well, actually, in my essay, the idea was to show that GDP undervalues countries where a large share of work remains unpaid, like especially care and household work, while like more developed countries tend to outsource those same tasks, which makes them visible in monetary terms and therefore counted as part of GDP. So like in my essay, I proposed a simple complementary indicator, like to estimate the input value of unpaid care tasks and add it as a share of GDP. And it can be done using two data sources that most countries already have, which are, as they mentioned before, time use surveys, which show how much time adults spend on care, and household labor service, which provide the average wage for domestic work. So by multiplying those two figures, we can calculate the economic value of unpaid care and express this as a percentage of GDP. And it doesn't like replace GDP, but it make it comparable across different levels of development. I belong to the global south, so I think that's something that we ought to do. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Felix. All right. I was just looking at that time and it's ticking away. So I think we won't get to the rest of the questions in the Q&A, but what I will ask each of our panelists, just so we can hear from each of you one more time, is, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing right now to get us closer to this more comprehensive wealth, this idea of going beyond GDP to look broader, what would you focus on first? What would be that one thing you would change? Sorry to put you on the spot, but since we have a little bit of time, that's going to be the last thing I'm curious about. So, Aline, any thoughts on what you would change if you could?
Yeah, I think we have to find a good narrative, to sell this idea. That's the first. And the second one is, I think, the youth, young people is very important target, to be, induced by this idea. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Let's go to Sonal.
Yeah, well, there are no magic wands. Educate, organize, agitate, yeah, and do the best you can.
Great. Anieka?
I would like to change the system of national accounts. So related to what Felix was saying, this is very influential. And the good thing is that there is initiatives also underway to change this, but it will probably be too late.
Felix?
Oh, I think I'll change the curricula, and actually I would spend more time on like history of economic thought modules, because the main thing we're talking about here is the theory of value. And then you have the classical political economy theory of value, where value is understood as a social and market relation. And then if you want to go like beyond GDP, you need a new theory of value. So I'll start from scratch with a good module of history of economic thought. Yeah.
Great. Livia, anything you would wish for?
Thank you so much, Kaylee. No, first of all, I have to say that it was a very interesting panel. And maybe just on the wish list, I think there were so many interesting things said, the changes in the curriculum, creating a narrative to sell this idea, because GDP has a wonderful narrative to sell itself and everybody seems to buying into it. So we need a similar narrative for beyond GDP, whatever it means. And, we already touched on if it's the informal labor, if it's the, well-being indicators and many other aspects, care economy. And also, I think it was very important that a lot of the indicators, that the panelists listed, and many of you said that, the data are available. We can start doing this, we can start promoting this and putting it next to GDP. And hopefully next year in 2026, when the UN comes up with the recommendations how to complement GDP, also this broad set of measurements and ideas can get maybe a bit streamlined, and it may help countries to to kind of frame that narrative. So what exactly to measure, or what kind of types of indices to consider, and maybe it also helps them push everybody into a certain direction within some differences. So I think, as I said, we will update or keep monitoring the online tools, so as there are developments from the UN, so that we can integrate them to be absolutely up to date. And we are exactly at that time. So I again would like to thank you, the panelists. I would like to thank you to Kaylee for doing the moderation, and for all of you to sharing your ideas. The event was recorded. We will put the recording online in a day or so. We will do a write-up about the event, so that the main ideas are also available at the IISD Knowledge Hub. And then you will receive the link to the online tool, which will be posted on the IISD website, and you will be free to use it. I also would like to stress that we had such a wonderful audience, so feel free to reach out, any of you, on any collaboration or ideas to working together. We talked about the educational part of Beyond GDP, but also other areas on Beyond GDP. Would be very happy to engage and explore if there is something that we can do together. Thank you so much.